Krishna, dear devotees, welcome back to the daily readings of Srila Prabhupada's books, right here in the live studios in Hythe, Kent, Southeast England, next to the English Channel. And as I say every day, you're probably tired of hearing it, but it's the truth, so I'm going to keep saying it. The word Hythe in Anglo-Saxon translates into haven. So we're trying to create a safe haven for anyone who really wants to take shelter from the chaos that's going on in the world today. And it is chaos. Hearing Srila Prabhupada's books every day, regularly, with full attention and submission will solve all those problems internally. Things may go on in the material world that are difficult to do and difficult to tolerate, but with this taste for hearing the absolute truth from Srila Prabhupada, from the Guru Parampara, from Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, we will become relieved from anxiety and unnecessary trouble. Hare Krishna. So, Srimad Bhagavatam Mahima Stotram from Sri Krishna Lila Stava by Srila Sanatana Goswami glorifies the Srimad Bhagavatam and also tangentially the Bhagavad-gita, because they're so intimately related. It goes like this. Sarva Shastra Dipiyusha Sarva Vedaika Satpala Sarva Siddhanta Ratnaja Sarva Lokaika Drik Prida. O nectar from the ocean of all scriptures, singular fruit of all the Vedas, rich mine of the precious gems of all conclusive truths, you are the only giver of sight to all the worlds. Sarva Bhagavata Prana Srimad Bhagavata Prabho Kalidwandodita Aditya Sri Krishna Parivartita. O life air of all the Supreme Lord's devotees, O Master Srimad Bhagavatam, you are the sun risen in the darkness of Kali. You are the exact image of Sri Krishna. Paramananda Pataya Prema Varshakshadayate Sarvada Sevasevyaya Sri Krishnaya Namostume. I bow down to you who are supremely blissful to read. Your every syllable pours down a flood of prema. You can always be served by everyone. You are Sri Krishna himself. Madeka Bando Matsangin Madguro Man Mahadana Man Nisdadaka Mad Bhagya Mad Ananda Namostute. My only friend, my constant companion, my spiritual master, my great wealth, my savior, my good fortune, my source of ecstasy, I bow down to you. Asadu saduta dayin atini jotatakada hanamunchagada chinmam prem narit gantayokspura. O bestower of saintliness to the unsaintly, O exalter of the most fallen, please never leave me. Always appear in my heart and my voice with pure love. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. All right, we've reached in the Bhagavad-gita As It Is, Chapter 15, the Yoga of the Supreme Person. Krishna is continuing to enlighten us all in the details of how to connect with Him. Chapter 15, the Yoga of the Supreme Person. The ultimate purpose of Vedic knowledge is to detach oneself from the entanglement of the material world and to understand Lord Krishna as the Supreme Personality of Godhead. One who understands Krishna's supreme identity surrenders unto Him and engages in his devotional service. Text 1. Shri Bhagavan-uvacha Urdvamulam madakshakam ashvatam prahuravyayam chandangsi yasya parnani yastam veda savedavit. The Supreme Personality of Godhead said, it is said that there is an imperishable banyan tree that has its roots upward and its branches down, and whose leaves are the Vedic hymns. One who knows this tree is the knower of the Vedas. Purport. After the discussion of the importance of Bhakti Yoga, one may question, what about the Vedas? It is explained in this chapter that the purpose of Vedic study is to understand Krishna. Therefore, one who is in Krishna consciousness, who is engaged in devotional service, already knows the Vedas. The entanglement of this material world is compared here to a banyan tree. For one who is engaged in fruitive activities, there is no end to the banyan tree. He wanders from one branch to another, to another, to another. The tree of this material world has no end, and for one who is attached to this tree, there is no possibility of liberation. The Vedic hymns, meant for elevating oneself, are called the leaves of this tree. The tree's roots grow upward because they begin from where Brahma is located, the topmost planet of this universe. If one can understand this indestructible tree of illusion, then one can get out of it. This process of extrication should be understood. In the previous chapters, it has been explained that there are many processes by which to get out of the material entanglement. And up through the 14th chapter, we have seen that devotional service to the Supreme Lord is the best way. Now, the basic principle of devotional service is detachment from material activities and attachment to the transcendental service of the Lord. The process of breaking attachment to the material world is discussed in the beginning of this chapter. The root of this material existence grows upward. This means that it begins from the total material substance, from the topmost planet of the universe. From there, the whole universe is expanded, with so many branches representing the various planetary systems. The fruits represent the results of the living entity's activities, namely religion, economic development, sense gratification, and liberation. Now, there is no ready experience in this world of a tree situated with its branches down and its roots upward, but there is such a thing. That tree can be found beneath a reservoir of water. We can see that the trees on the bank reflect upon the water with their branches down and roots up. In other words, the tree of this material world is only a reflection of the real tree of the spiritual world. This reflection of the spiritual world is situated on desire, just as a tree's reflection is situated on water. Desire is the cause of things being situated in this reflected material light. One who wants to get out of this material existence must know this tree thoroughly through analytical study. Then he can cut off his relationship with it. This tree, being the reflection of the real tree, is an exact replica. Everything is there in the spiritual world. The impersonalists take Brahman to be the root of this material tree. And from the root, according to Sankhya philosophy, come Prakriti, Purusha, then the 3 gunas, then the 5 gross elements, Pancha Mahabhuta, then the 10 senses, Dashendriya, mind, and so on. In this way they divide up the whole material world into 24 elements. If Brahman is the center of all manifestations, then this material world is a manifestation of the center by 180 degrees, and the other 180 degrees constitute the spiritual world. The material world is the perverted reflection, so the spiritual world must have the same variegatedness. But in reality, therefore, both Prakriti and Purusha must be there. In the spiritual world, however, Prakriti is the Supreme Lord's internal energy, and the Purusha is the Supreme Lord Himself. That is explained in Bhagavad-gita 8.22, Purusha Sapadak Partha. The difference between the spiritual and material manifestation is that the former is eternal and the latter is temporary. A reflection is temporary, for it is sometimes seen and sometimes not seen. But the origin from whence the reflection is reflected is eternal. The material reflection of the tree has to be cut off. When it is said that a person knows the Vedas, it is assumed that he knows how to cut off attachment to this material world. If one knows that process, he actually knows the Vedas. One who is attracted by the ritualistic formulas of the Vedas is attracted by the beautiful green leaves of the tree. He does not exactly know the purpose of the Vedas. The purpose of the Vedas, as disclosed by the personality of Godhead Himself, is to cut down this reflected tree and attain the real tree of the spiritual world. Text 2. Adas chordvam prastritas tasya shaka guna pravrida vishaya pravalaha adas chamulan yanusantatani karmanubandini manushya loke. The branches of this tree extend downward and upward, nourished by the 3 modes of material nature. The twigs are the objects of the senses. This tree also has roots going down, and these are bound to the fruitive actions of human society. Purport. The description of the banyan tree is further explained here. Its branches spread in all directions. In the lower parts, there are variegated manifestations of living entities, human beings, animals, horses, cows, dogs, cats, and so on. These are situated on the lower parts of the branches, whereas on the upper parts are higher forms of living entities, the demigods, Gandharvas, and many other higher species of life. As a tree is nourished by water, so this tree is nourished by the 3 modes of material nature. Sometimes we find that a tract of land is barren for want of sufficient water, and sometimes a tract is very green. Similarly, where particular modes of material nature are proportionately greater in quantity, the different species of life are manifested accordingly. The twigs of the tree are considered to be the sense objects. By development of the different modes of nature, we develop different senses, and by the senses we enjoy different varieties of sense objects. The tips of the branches are the senses, the ears, nose, eyes, etc., which are attached to the enjoyment of different sense objects. The twigs are sound, form, touch, and so on, the sense objects. The subsidiary roots are attachments and aversions, which are byproducts of different varieties of suffering and sense enjoyment. The tendencies toward piety and impiety are considered to develop from these secondary roots, which spread in all directions. The real root is from Brahmaloka, and the other roots are in the human planetary systems. After one enjoys the results of virtuous activities in the upper planetary systems, he comes down to this earth and renews his karma, or fruitive activities, for promotion. This planet of human beings is considered the field of activities. Text 3 and 4. Narupam asye hatato palabhyate nanto nachadir nachasam pratishta ashwatam enam suvirudamulam asanga shastrena dridena chitva tatak padam tat parimargitavyam yasmin gatana nivartanti bhuyaha tam eva chadyam purusham prapadye yatak pariti prasrita purani. The real form of this tree cannot be perceived in this world. No one can understand where it ends, where it begins, and where its foundation is. But with determination, one must cut down this strongly rooted tree with the weapon of detachment. Thereafter, one must seek that place from which, having gone, one never returns, and there surrender to the Supreme Personality of Godhead, from whom everything began and from whom everything has extended since time immemorial. Purport. It is now clearly stated that the real form of this banyan tree cannot be understood in this material world. Since the root is upwards, the extension of the real tree is at the other end. When entangled with the material expansions of the tree, one cannot see how far the tree extends, nor can one see the beginning of this tree. Yet one has to find out the cause. I am the son of my father. My father is the son of such and such a person, and so on. By searching in this way, one comes to Brahma, who is generated by the Garbhodakashayi Vishnu. Finally, in this way, when one reaches the Supreme Personality of Godhead, that is the end of research work. One has to search out that origin of this tree, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, through the association of persons who are in knowledge of that Supreme Personality of Godhead. Then, by understanding, one becomes gradually detached from this false reflection of reality. And by knowledge, one can cut off the connection and actually become situated in the real tree. The word asanga is very important in this connection because the attachment for sense enjoyment and lording it over the material nature is very strong. Therefore, one must learn detachment by discussion of spiritual science based on authoritative scriptures, and one must hear from persons who are actually in knowledge. As a result of such discussion, in the association of devotees, one comes to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Then, the first thing one must do is surrender to Him. The description of that place whence having gone, one never returns to this false reflected tree is given here. The Supreme Personality of Godhead, Krishna, is the original root from whom everything has emanated. To gain favor of that personality of Godhead, one has only to surrender. And this is a result of performing devotional service by hearing, chanting, and so on. He is the cause of the extension of the material world. This has already been explained by the Lord himself. Ahang sarvasya prabhavat. I am the origin of everything. Therefore, to get out of the entanglement of this strong banyan tree of material life, one must surrender to Krishna. As soon as one surrenders unto Krishna, one becomes detached automatically from this material extension. Text 5. Nirmana boha, nirmana moha jitasanga dosha, adhyatma nitya vinivritta kamaha, dvandvayar vimukta sukadukha samgyayar gachchantya mudak padamavyayam tat. Those who are free from false prestige, illusion, and false association, who understand the eternal, and who are done with material lust, who are freed from the dualities of happiness and distress, and who, unbewildered, know how to surrender unto the Supreme Person, attain to that eternal kingdom. Purport. The surrendering process is described here very nicely. The first qualification is that one should not be deluded by pride. Because the conditioned soul is puffed up, thinking himself the lord of material nature, it is very difficult for him to surrender unto the Supreme Personality of Godhead. One should know by the cultivation of real knowledge that he is not lord of material nature. The Supreme Personality of Godhead is the Lord. When one is free from delusion caused by pride, he can begin the process of surrender. For one who is always expecting some honor in this material world, it is not possible to surrender to the Supreme Person. Pride is due to illusion, for although one comes here, stays for a brief time, and then goes away, he has the foolish notion that he is the Lord of the world. He thus makes all things complicated, and he is always in trouble. The whole world moves under this impression. People are considering the land, this earth, to belong to human society, and they have divided the land under the false impression that they are the proprietors. One has to get out of this false notion that human society is the proprietor of this world. When one is freed from such a false notion, he becomes free from all the false associations caused by familial, social, and national affections. These faulty associations bind one to this material world. After this stage, one has to develop spiritual knowledge. One has to cultivate knowledge of what is actually his own and what is actually not his own. And when one has an understanding of things as they are, one becomes free from all dual conceptions, such as happiness and distress, pleasure and pain. He becomes full in knowledge. Then it is possible for him to surrender to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Text 6. Natad bhasyate suryo nishashanko napavakaha yadgatva nanivartante taddhamma paramam mama. That supreme abode of mine is not illumined by the sun or moon, nor by fire or electricity. Those who reach it never return to this material world. Purport. The spiritual world, the abode of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Krishna, which is known as Krishna Loka, Goloka Vrindavan, is described here. In the spiritual sky, there is no need of sunshine, moonshine, fire, or electricity, because all the planets are self-luminous. We have only one planet in this universe, the sun, which is self-luminous. But all the planets in the spiritual sky are self-luminous. The shining effulgence of all those planets, called Vaikunthas, constitutes the shining sky known as the Brahmajyoti. Actually, the effulgence is emanating from the planet of Krishna, Goloka Vrindavan. Part of that shining effulgence is covered by the Mahat Tattva, the material world. Other than this, the major portion of that shining sky is full of spiritual planets, which are called Vaikunthas, chief of which is Goloka Vrindavan. As long as a living entity is in this dark material world, he is in conditional life. But as soon as he reaches the spiritual sky, by cutting through the false, perverted tree of this material world, he becomes liberated. Then there is no chance of his coming back here. In his conditional life, the living entity considers himself to be the lord of this material world. But in his liberated state, he enters into the spiritual kingdom and becomes an associate of the Supreme Lord. There, he enjoys spiritual bliss, eternal life, and full knowledge. One should be captivated by this information. He should desire to transfer himself to that eternal world and extricate himself from the false reflection of reality. For one who is too much attached to this material world, it is very difficult to cut that attachment. But if he takes to Krishna consciousness, there is a chance of gradually becoming detached. One has to associate himself with devotees, those who are in Krishna consciousness. One should search out a society dedicated to Krishna consciousness and learn how to discharge devotional service. In this way, he can cut off his attachment to the material world. One cannot become detached from the attraction of the material world simply by dressing himself in saffron cloth. He must become attached to the devotional service of the Lord. Therefore, one should take it seriously. The devotional service, as described in the 12th chapter, is the only way to get out of this false representation of the real tree. In chapter 14, the contamination of all kinds of processes by material nature is described. Only devotional service is described as purely transcendental. The words paramam mama are very important here. Actually, every nook and corner is the property of the Supreme Lord. But the spiritual world is paramam, full of 6 opulences. The Katha Upanishad 2.2.15 also confirms Natatra Suryo Bhati Na Chandrata Tadakam Chandra Tarakam. For the whole spiritual sky is illuminated by the internal potency of the Supreme Lord. That supreme abode can be achieved only by surrender and by no other means. Text 7. Mamai Bangsho Jiva Loke Jiva Bhuta Sanatanaha Manak Shastanindriyani Prakriti Stani Karshati. The living entities in this conditioned world are my eternal fragmental parts. Due to conditioned life, they are struggling very hard with the six senses, which include the mind. Purport. In this verse, the identity of the living being is clearly given. The living entity is the fragmental part and parcel of the Supreme Lord, eternally. It is not that he assumes individuality in his conditional life, and in his liberated state becomes one with the Supreme Lord. He is eternally fragmented. It is clearly said, Sanatana. According to the Vedic version, the Supreme Lord manifests and expands himself in innumerable expansions, of which the primary expansions are called Vishnu Tattva, and the secondary expansions are called the living entities. In other words, the Vishnu Tattva is the personal expansion, and the living entities are the separated expansions. By his personal expansion, he is manifested in various forms, like Lord Rama, Nishingadev, Vishnumurti, and all the predominating deities in the Vaikuntha planets. The separated expansions of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, the individual identities of the Godhead, are always present. I'm sorry, I skipped, sorry. The separated expansions, the living entities, are eternally servitors. The personal expansions of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, the individual identities of the Godhead, are always present. Similarly, the separated expansions of living entities have their identities. As fragmental parts and parcels of the Supreme Lord, the living entities also have fragmental portions of his qualities, of which independence is one. Every living entity is an individual soul. Every living entity, as an individual soul, has his personal individuality and in a minute form of independence, a minute form of independence. By misuse of that independence, one becomes a conditioned soul. And by proper use of independence, he is always liberated. In either case, he is qualitatively eternal, as the Supreme Lord is. In his liberated state, he is freed from this material condition, and he is under the engagement of transcendental service unto the Lord. In his conditioned life, he is dominated by the material modes of nature, and he forgets the transcendental loving service of the Lord. As a result, he has to struggle very hard to maintain his existence in the material world. The living entities, not only human beings and the cats and dogs, but even the greater controllers of the material world, Brahma, Lord Shiva, and even Vishnu, are all parts and parcels of the Supreme Lord. They are all eternal, not temporary manifestations. The word karshati, struggling or grappling hard, is very significant. The conditioned soul is bound up as though shackled by iron chains. He is bound up by the false ego, and the mind is the chief agent which is driving him in this material existence. When the mind is in the mode of goodness, his activities are good. And when the mind is in the mode of passion, his activities are troublesome. And when the mind is in the mode of ignorance, he travels in the lower species of life. It is clear, however, in this verse, that the conditioned soul is covered by the material body with the mind and the senses, and when he is liberated, this material covering perishes, but his spiritual body manifests itself in its individual capacity. The following information is there in the Madhyandinayana Shruti. Sava Esha Brahmanishta Idang Sharidam Martyam Atishrija Brahma Visampadya Brahmana Pashati Brahmana Shrinuti Brahmanai Vedam Sarvam Anu Bhavati. It is stated here that when a living entity gives up this material embodiment and enters into the spiritual world, he revives his spiritual body, and in his spiritual body, he can see the Supreme Personality of Godhead face to face. He can hear him and speak to him face to face, and he can understand the Supreme Personality as he is. From Srimad Bhagavatam 3:15-14, it is also understood, Vasanti yatra purushak sarve vaikunta murtayaha. In the spiritual planets, everyone lives in bodies featured like the Supreme Personality of Godheads. As far as bodily construction is concerned, there is no difference between the part and parcel living entities and the expansions of Vishnumurti. In other words, at liberation, the living entity gets a spiritual body by the grace of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. The words Mamai Bhangsha, fragmental parts and parcels of the Supreme Lord, are also very significant. The fragmental portion of the Supreme Lord is not like some material broken part. We have already understood in the second chapter that the spirit cannot be cut into pieces. This fragment is not materially conceived. It is not like matter, which can be cut into pieces and joined together again. That conception is not applicable here, because the Sanskrit word sanatana, eternal, is used. The fragmental portion is eternal. It is also stated in the beginning of the second chapter that in each and every individual body, the fragmental portion of the Supreme Lord is present. Dehino smin yata dehe. That fragmental portion, when liberated from the bodily entanglement, revives its original spiritual body in the spiritual sky, in a spiritual planet, and enjoys association with the Supreme Lord. It is, however, understood here that the living entity, being the fragmental part and parcel of the Supreme Lord, is qualitatively one with the Lord, just as the parts and parcels of gold are also gold. Text 8. Sharidam yad avapnoti yat chap utkramatishvaraha grihit vaitani samyati vayur gandan ivashayat. The living entity in the material world carries his different conception of life, his different conceptions of life from one body to another, as the air carries aromas. Thus he takes one kind of body and again quits it to take another. Purport. Here the living entity is described as Ishvara, the controller of his own body. If he likes, he can change his body to a higher grade, and if he likes, he can move to a lower class. Minute independence is there. The change his body undergoes depends upon him. At the time of death, the consciousness he has created will carry him to the next type of body. If he has made his consciousness like that of a cat or dog, he is sure to change to a cat's or a dog's body. And if he has fixed his consciousness on godly qualities, he will change into the form of a demigod. And if he is in Krishna consciousness, he will be transferred to Krishna Loka, in the spiritual sky, and will associate with Krishna. It is a false claim that after the annihilation of this body, everything is finished. The individual soul is transmigrating from one body to another, and his present body and present activities are the background of his next body. One gets a different body according to karma, and he has to quit this body in due course. It is stated here that the subtle body, which carries the conception of the next body, develops another body in the next life. This process of transmigrating from one body to another and struggling while in the body is called karshati, or struggle for existence. Text. I'll stop here. It's 6:46, 7:46 rather. So that's about 45 minutes of reading. We invite now all of the assembled sages to please reflect upon what we've heard. Something stood out, please revisit and discuss it. Hare Krishna.
First is from Gopakanya Devi Dasi.
Haribo. Gopakanya Devi Dasi. Hare Krishna.
She says, Hare Krishna, dear Maharaj, and all assembled devotees, all glories to Srila Prabhupada.
Jai. All glories to Prabhupada.
And from Sudevi Dasi.
Haribo Sudevi Dasi.
She says, Hare Krishna, Maharaj.
Hare Krishna.
Wonderful as always to spend this time with you, Krishna Katha and the fortunate assembled devotees.
Yes, it's the goal of life, actually. Haribo.
From Rati Manjari.
Haribo Rati.
She says, Jai Guru Maharaj, telling it like it is.
Yeah, and thank you for sending those two Gitas to help us tell it like it is. Hare Krishna. Thanks very much. They arrived today.
And from Bhaktamatsu.
Haribo Bhaktamatsu.
He says, Hare Krishna Maharaj, nothing like reading and distributing Bhagavad-gita.
Nothing like it. I couldn't agree more. Now we're in the first days of the Prabhupada Marathon that we do every year to increase our effort to distribute as many books as possible. And we wish everyone an ecstatic marathon. And now that we're in this COVID situation, my limited experience is that people are more receptive than other. At least many people are more receptive than ever. There's an unlimited field of people to give books to. And Prabhupada, what's the word? reassured us once that when devotees were concerned that there may be a war or economic collapse or social collapse or whatever, Srila Prabhupada said, no, always the books will be there. There'll always be people to distribute them to. It's an unlimited service. Hare Krishna. So we encourage all the devotees who are going out every day and distributing these books. Hare Krishna.
Next is from Gopal Roy.
Haribol Gopal Roy, speaking of those who are going out and distributing these books.
He says, Srila Prabhupada's purports are very illuminating when discussing the banyan tree of the material world.
Yes.
There was no way I would understand it without them.
Yeah, the purports are more important. Prabhupada said that. You know, when Hayagriva was first, starting to edit, and he would come back to Prabhupada with questions about the verses. And after some time, Prabhupada got a little annoyed with him because, and he said, look, the purports are more important than the verses. So if you look at one of the Gitas that is not, deviated, there are some translations which are not off completely, then you can refer there to get some answers to your questions. But unfortunately, he ended up choosing Radhakrishna, the ex-president of India, for the help for the translations, and therefore they have to be adjusted. But the purports are more important. Hare Krishna.
He also has a question.
Ah.
He says, is this planet Earth the only planet where living beings create karma?
Yes.
And from Brajbalaba.
Yes, Brajbalaba, Hari Bol. Missing you.
He says, Hare Krishna Maharaj, please accept my humble obeisances. All glories to Srila Prabhupada.
Jai, all glories to Prabhupada.
So the subtle body doesn't change? It goes with us as we change bodies?
Yes. The subtle body changes in the sense that there's more input. The subtle body, just like when you have your computer and you have your hard drive or your internal drive, and the more you enter into it, it stores it in the storage department. So the subtle body is like that. It's like the software, and the body is like the hardware. And all the perceptions that come, every single thing that you see and taste and smell and touch and do and feel in this material world, it is all stored in the subtle body. So in one sense, the subtle body is always changing, but the subtle body is like a, how do I say this? It's like a suitcase that you're carrying with you. That's a very gross example. It's like an envelope. It's like a container, that the soul is inside. And the state of the material subtle body is the state that directs the super soul and the material energy to decide where that subtle body will go next into a gross body. So yes, the subtle body is changing in the sense that it's increasing its sensual knowledge or sensual experience, but it's the same subtle body. The gross body disintegrates, but the subtle body does not disintegrate, and it carries the soul to the next gross body, depending on the state of your subtle body at the time of death. Hare Krishna.
from Anandamurti Devi Dasi.
Haribol Anandamurti.
She says, Dear Guru Maharaj and all assembled devotees, please accept my humble obeisances. All glories to Srila Prabhupada.
Jai Prabhupada.
Thank you so much for today's reading. Srila Prabhupada explains that the living entity is the part and parcel of the Supreme Lord, and its quality is the same as the Supreme Lord. But I am always feeling I am full of faults and have unfavorable qualities because I am in this material world and I have unfavorable desires. But I have to cut down this material banyan tree by devotional service.
Yes, that means you have to change your desires. Your desires have to change from wanting to enjoy the material energy to wanting to be with Krishna and enjoy the company of his eternal associates in the spiritual world. That's why the one verse that we read, Nirmana Moho, I can't remember the Sanskrit. Anyway, it means that when one is free from lust and desire and has had enough of material existence, then his mind can turn towards the spiritual, can turn towards the super soul, and eventually turn toward the Supreme Personality of Godhead and the spiritual sky and the spiritual planets there. And the process is simple. Chanting Hare Krishna without offense, but that requires some effort on our part and some knowledge on what an offense is and how to avoid it. And hearing and chanting the glories of the Lord and his instructions. This is the process. And that naturally leads this subtle body to want to do something for Krishna. When you get something so valuable, you want to share it. So when you share it and do something for Krishna to please him, which means, according to the Bhagavad-gita, to explain to others who are without this knowledge so far, then Krishna becomes very pleased. And very easily, he can give us everything. And he does, as soon as we actually surrender to him fully. We may still be in the material world, and there may be some still reactions we have to go through, but as Prabhupada described, it's like a fan is going, and the fan is constructed in such a way as there's hardly any resistance, which makes the fan goes around with very little effort by the electricity. It saves electricity. And then when you unplug the fan, when there's no longer current going into the fan, then the fan takes some time, to stop turning because of the lack of friction in the way it's constructed. So once we stop doing nonsense, once we stop material sense gratification and try to perform devotional service with our full energy, our full hearts, our full mind and bodies and senses, then the fan slows down and eventually stops. And then we can perceive that we're not the body. It's not a mechanical, mathematical calculation, just like the scientists calculate where the planets are going to be by their observation of them over a long period of time. It's not like this. Knowledge is not like that. Quantum theory, theory of action and reaction, all these scientific theories are based on observation of the material energy, but it's not seeing the spiritual energy and what the spiritual energy is and what the spiritual energy does. But what this knowledge does is it reveals to us that we're not the body and that we're spiritual beings and that we actually belong somewhere else than where we are in the material world. And once that dawns on us, And it will dawn on us. The more we hear, the more we chant, sometimes we may forget. In the beginning, we may forget a lot. Sometimes we may be 5% Krishna conscious, or 10, or 20, or whatever. But the goal is to become fully Krishna conscious by the end of this life. By practice, by detachment, by attachment to this knowledge, by attachment to the form of Krishna and the name of Krishna and the activities of Krishna and eternal associates of Krishna. Srila Prabhupada's books are full of these descriptions. And if we become, the more we become attached to hearing about them, automatically the detachment comes from material sense objects, unless we're using them in the service of Krishna. And then they have no detrimental effects. We watch our dear Rasika Shirmani. He's always got two computers because he's doing he needs to have one for the watching the text and the other for watching the sound. And it's quite a symphony to watch him do this. But he's not attached to either computer because he's been using them in devotional service. Hare Krishna. Sorry for speaking for you, but anyway, that's what I see.
Hare Krishna. Anytime you can.
Hare Krishna. Use you as an example.
And there's more from Anandamurti.
Anandamurti, Hare Krishna.
She says, "Today is the first day which I speak Bhagavad-gita as a 5-day course.
Oh.
Today one new person came to hear the Bhagavad-gita, and the next day, 15th of December, 7 people will come to hear the Bhagavad-gita.
Nice.
Most of them are first time hearing the Gita.
Very nice.
So I humbly request your blessing so that I could only speak what you and Srila Prabhupada speak.
May it come to pass. So be it. So be it. You're intelligent, you're educated, you have a good memory, so apply it and you will say the right things. Just don't say things that you don't understand completely. Just say what you've understood and be yourself, and it will be effective. As Bertrand Russell said, just be yourself, all the other positions are taken.
And from Rati Manjari.
Yes, Rati?
She says, Dear Guru Maharaj, please accept my humble obeisances. In this chapter, I really like the verses 3 and 4, in which it talks about the need to cut down the strongly rooted tree with the weapon of detachment, and seeking that place from which, having gone, one never returns, and there surrender to that Supreme Personality of Godhead,
yes,
from whom everything began, and from whom everything is extended since time immemorial. So visual and so poetic.
Yes, these are picture words, not book words. Srila Prabhupada's transcendental vision is being he's imparting that vision to us through his words. It's mystical. It really is mystical. So now we're connected with Prabhupada. We're able to hear his words straight like this, and we should just keep doing this because this process will gradually wear down the subtle body and give us a higher taste so that we can actually surrender to Krishna and go back to him and play with him and eat with him, hang out with him. Hare Krishna.
And from Bhakta Sebastian.
Bhakta Sebastian, Hare Krishna, eager to hear how the marathon's going.
He says, Hare Krishna Guru Maharaj, please accept my humble obeisances. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. Today's book distribution was purifying. Srila Prabhupada mentioned pride in text 5, And I could feel how pride is so important to overcome if I want to surrender even a little bit. It's actually what we look for in the souls we talk to as well, which we have to give the books as they are as best as possible, because they will surrender to Srila Prabhupada and not to my own speculation or attachments.
Yes. Yes, Prabhupada said, I will never die. I will live forever in my books. His books are not different from him. The sound is not different from him. That doesn't mean that we just, parrot each word without using our own words. We learn to say what's in the books with our own words and in a way that will attract the person that we're speaking to and interest them and attract them. That takes practice, and that means you must tolerate so many mistakes, and it takes time to learn the art of preaching, the art of distributing Srila Prabhupada's books. But there's no other way to get there than to practice continuously over time. Then we become mature. There's no other way to mature. I thank you. Oops.
Rati Manjari?
Sorry. Yes, Rati.
She says, how should we understand the term with the weapon of detachment? Is it meant like an instrument, a tool, or is it because we actually need to do a battle with that tree of our material entanglement?
The weapon of detachment means that when we withdraw from attachment to material things, meaning when we gradually become aware and convinced that nothing belongs to me, this computer, that desk, all these things that we have, they don't belong to us, because we will be forced to leave them at some point in the future, no matter who you are, no matter how much you have, no matter how much you don't have. A pauper can be proud of his penny, as they say. So the weapon of attachment means that we stop feeling that we possessed, feeling that we own things, and gradually accept that they belong to Krishna through the assimilation of this knowledge. Analyzing, as it said here, you cut the banyan tree by analyzing the material energy and what it is and how it works. And that knowledge detaches us from feelings of possessiveness, and that is a weapon that slashes the material attachment. We heard that about in the 4th chapter, at the end of the 4th chapter.
She also wrote, tonight I may be word of wrangling a little, but I just love to hear you speak your realizations. And I am happy you received the package.
Yeah, thank you very much, Adi. It's really important. Thank you so much for your wonderful reflections as usual, and please share and try to get other souls to come and listen and hear and reflect and discuss with the other Vaishnavas, and in that way we'll become purified of material desires and material attachment. Hare Krishna. Srimad Bhagavad-gita As It Is ki jai. Samaveda Bhaktivedanta ki jai. Gaur Premanandi Hari Hari Bol. See you tomorrow night, same time, same place, same topic. The never tiring nectar of Krishna's transcendental words and Srila Prabhupada's transcendental explanations of what they mean. See you tomorrow. Haribo.